Quasimodo and Puss in Boots, A Christmas Tale, written and read by Bill Lenihan. It was Christmas Eve, and as Quasimodo walked down Oxford Street, he was not a happy chap. As if being concerned about his resident status due to Brexit wasn't enough, he'd now lost his part-time job as bell ringer at Big Ben. He'd been told that as the clock was now being renovated, he wouldn't be needed, that when the work was complete, his job would be done by 2 AAA batteries. This had really left him in le merde, or as we say in English, the shit. He had tried to claim political asylum, but had been turned down on the grounds that he was French, and all French people should be in an asylum anyway. Well, that's what the man with the Indian accent at the desk had told him. He was still under investigation in France, and he knew there was an international arrest warrant out for him after doing a runner. Well, it wasn't so much of a run, more a sideways shuffle, as his hump was more to the left than right. But call it what you like, he'd legged it to England. Now, as he limped down the street, mumbling to himself, "It's the bells," his mind went back to that fateful day. It all started when Frollo, the Archdeacon, had fallen from a gargoyle at Notre Dame. It was his favourite place when he was off his face and wanted to be close to heaven. And as the gargoyle was the highest on the cathedral, it was obviously his favourite place. Leaning across to give Quasimodo his half of the joint, he overreached and down he went. The gendarmes were soon on the job, and poor old Quasi was soon under interrogation. "It wasn't my fault," protested Quasimodo. "When I said he was I meant I up, you know, like I up." The gendarmes just looked at him, saying nothing, only because they couldn't think of anything to say. But Quasimodo continued to protest his innocence. "'Twas horrible, I'm telling you, 'twas horrible." Well, something like that, but in a French accent. One minute he was sitting there with a gargoyle between his legs, sharing a joint, you know what I mean. And the next minute, splat, there he was on the pavement. "He still had the joint in his hand, man," said a tearful Quasimodo. "I mean, that was my last joint, man. Frollo always insisted he wanted his half first, just 'cause he was an archdeacon." And wiping the tears from his eyes and a dribble from his chin, Quasimodo gave the gendarmes what he considered his most remorseful look. "Got any spare weed in your man?" he said. "I'm gagging." One of the gendarmes reached out and grabbed him by the throat. "All right, Maigret," shouted Quasimodo. "Keep your hair on," which only annoyed the gendarme more, as he was bald. The gendarme looked into his face, and with a snarl said they were sick of being called out in the middle of the night due to him ringing the bells and shouting at passers-by, "It's the bells." After all, they all knew it was the bloody bells. Then there were the complaints about him and Esmeralda partying late into the night and veils flying everywhere. Quasimodo tried to interrupt, saying that it was only 7 veils, but his protestations were ignored by the gendarmes. "These complaints will be fully investigated," they said, "as soon as Esmeralda comes out of rehab." "Don't go anywhere," said the gendarme. "As soon as we scrape up the Archdeacon from the pavement, we'll be coming back for you." As he turned to leave, Quasimodo said under his breath, "Connard." Taking accepting to be called a shithead, the gendarme turned and slapped Quasimodo across the head. Now left sulking in the bell tower, he lamented his loss. "After all, it was my last bit of weed, and I'm skint," he dribbled out loud to no one in particular. Suddenly the fragrant aroma of gouloirs filled his nostrils. At the same time, the shovels that were scraping the floor below stopped scraping. Looking down, he saw the gendarmes had stopped for a fumet, or as we say over here, a fag. And there in the centre of them stood his Sulu bin, with Frollo's legs hanging out. He knew they were Frollo's because he was still wearing his pink high heels. Frollo was a bit like that, he thought, Quasimodo. "Look at those lazy sods," he ranted, still feeling the palm of the gendarme's arm on his sore head. He was starting to feel irate. Well, he couldn't feel anything else as Esmeralda was still in rehab. It was then he really started to get the hump. "Well, it's my hump anyway," he thought. Climbing down the bell tower, he was off to the land of roast beef. But being skint, he cut a lift on the back of axle of a truck with 5 very nice Eritreans. Now, having spent the last 6 months in London, and it being Christmas, it was the last straw. Having just been sacked, despite his protestations, and threatening to strap himself to Big Ben, he was shown a door, which he thought was stupid, as even he knew what a door looked like. He'd been told that there was a vacancy for a bell ringer at St Martin's in the Field, but he wasn't interested. I mean, who wants to live in the field? I'm a city boy, he said. But now out on the street, and almost skint again, he'd have to find a squat. As he walked down the street, he heard someone shout. It was fortunate indeed that he'd come to England, as those nice people at the NHS had fitted him up with a free hearing aid. Well, hello there, said his sultry voice, as he stepped from the shadows. And there, standing under the lamplight, dressed in thigh-length black leather boots and the skimpiest skirt and top you could wish for, was the prettiest pussy he'd ever seen. Well, hello there, big boy, she said as she flicked her lashes at him, which almost sent him into cardiac arrest. What's your name then, big boy? She asked, emphasizing the words, big boy. Quasimodo, he replied, with a tremble in his voice and a knock on his knees. Not since Esmeralda and her 7 whales had he seen such a cool chick. Looking for a good time, Crassy, she said. You don't mind if I call you Crassy, do you? Then, in a most seductive voice, she said, you can call me. But before she could tell him, he interrupted her. No, don't tell me, he said. Let me guess. And with a big smile, he said, you're Puss in Boots. Don't be stupid, she replied. I'm Jennifer. And with a look of astonishment on his face and with his hands on his hips, he said, well, blow me. That'll be 15 quid then, said Jennifer. While haggling about the price, as only he had a few quid and was nearly out of weed, and God knows when his universal credit was to be paid, he pleaded. The car came screeching towards, and out jumped 2 of the Met's finest, waving a warrant. Quasimodo, we're arresting you. Before they could finish, Quasimodo took off, running down, but didn't get very far. He was brought down in a classic rugby tackle that Eddie Jones would have been proud of before he was sacked as England's manager. As they struggled to get handcuffs on Quasimodo, all hell broke loose. Spitting, hissing, and the flashing and slashing of razor-sharp claws sent the Met's best scurrying to the sanctuary of the car. As they licked their wounds, they watched as Jennifer and Quasimodo run down Oxford Street into the dazzling Christmas lights to live happily ever after, or something like that.